The Seven Liberal Arts, A Study in Medieval Culture by Paul Abelson, 1906. Chapter 1. The Development of the Curriculum of the Seven Liberal Arts. The question of the historical development of the curriculum comprising the seven liberal arts has received very little attention from scholars. The available sources at hand are meager, and the opinions of the authorities conflicting on many interesting questions. On the chief point, however, all are agreed, namely, that historically the cycle of the seven liberal arts in the Middle Ages was an outgrowth of the ancient Greek and Roman systems of education, that from the Greek and Roman course of study, modified by the introduction of Christian ideals of education, the curriculum of the Middle Ages was gradually evolved. In the present chapter, this development and adaptation will be briefly traced. In earliest times, Greek education consisted of the study of music and gymnastics. With the development of Greek life and thought, the subject of music was broadened to include poetry and letters. Plato's ideal scheme for the higher education of the guardian class contemplated a complete course in what we should call elementary, secondary, and higher education. The elementary, gymnastics, music, letters, that is, grammar, was to last till the 20th year. Secondary education, lasting from the 20th to the 30th year, was to embrace science, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and musical harmony. The higher education, from the 30th to the 35th year, was to consist of the study of philosophy, as a final preparation for the practical life of the ideal citizen. In the first two divisions of the course, we have a possible foreshadowing of the future separation of the curriculum into the trivium and the quadrivium. Aristotle's curriculum, which was to serve as a foundation for higher studies, consisted of 1. Reading and writing, 2. Gymnastics, 3. Music, and sometimes drawing. He too considered gymnastics and music important branches. Aristotle's ideas on education, as they have come down to us, are very fragmentary. There is no evidence to support the theory that he placed grammar, rhetoric, dialectic, arithmetic, geometry, and astronomy in the preparatory curriculum of Greek education, as has been asserted. From the text of Book 8 of the Politics, the only source on Aristotle's educational ideas, it certainly does not appear that these subjects of Plato's advanced curriculum of higher studies also formed what has been called Aristotle's program of secondary education. In the absence of any definite statement by Aristotle as to his views on the subject, it would be fair to assume that they agreed in the main with those of Plato, with the exception, perhaps, that his plan for the scientific training of a man would call for more natural science than mathematics. But even these scientific studies, whether mathematical or biological, were never considered part of the secondary curriculum to be studied before the Greek boy had reached the Ephebian age. Set over against these scientific studies were the practical studies of the Sophists. Their ascendancy made rhetoric and not natural science the essential subject of the higher education of the Greeks. One of the effects of this change was that some study of mathematics had to be introduced into the preparatory curriculum, since the value of mathematics to the Greeks was considered very great. Thus we find that, in the 3rd century, the preparatory work of the Greek young man consisted of a study of the following subjects: 1. Gymnastics, 2. Grammar, the rudiments of the language, 3. Music, 4. drawing, 5. Arithmetic, 6. Geometry, the last two being distinctly mentioned as the more advanced studies. Here again, we have a foreshadowing of the distinction between the trivium and the quadrivium, the division of the later periods. We find no further record of changes in the Greek curriculum of the liberal studies till the 1st century of the Christian era. In the works of Philo Judaeus, who flourished around 30 AD, there are frequent references to the encyclical liberal arts. He includes in his list all those that were current 300 years before his time, except drawing and gymnastics. He adds, however, rhetoric and dialectic. All these studies are spoken of as preparatory subjects and are clearly differentiated from the higher study, philosophy. Philo does not mention astronomy in his catalogue of preparatory subjects. In the first half of the 3rd century, we find a writer alluding to 1. Grammar, 2. Rhetoric, 3. Geometry, 4. Arithmetic, 5. Astronomy, and 6. Music, in such a way as to leave no doubt that he speaks of them as liberal arts. Dialectic, according to him, was then still considered a higher study. In Greece, then, it would appear that until after the period of Alexander the Great, there were only 3 or 4 preparatory studies in the curriculum: letters, music, gymnastics, and drawing, and that with the growth of knowledge, more subjects like dialectics and mathematics were added to the curriculum, and that, in this way, gradually, there came to exist in free Hellas a cycle of studies which were considered the minimum of liberal training for the average free man. Although the number of these was not definitely fixed at this time, at least 6 of the 7 subjects which later constituted the medieval curriculum were studied in the 1st century of the present era. Passing on to the Romans, we find that only after the Second Punic War did Rome begin to adopt Greek ideas of education. After the first period of innovation, during which the education of the young Roman was conducted by Greek teachers in the Greek language, strong efforts were made to establish a national literature and a national education. This period marks the beginning of textbooks written in Latin. Marcus Terentius Varro, 116 to 27 BC, contemporary of Cicero and Caesar, attempted in common with them to build up a system of education based on Greek ideas, but in which Roman and not Greek literature should be the basis. To further his objects, he wrote treatises on all the subjects taught in Greece in his day, but omitted drawing and included astronomy. His work, now lost, was entitled Disciplinarum Libri Novem, and contained treatises on grammar, rhetoric, dialectic, geometry, arithmetic, astrology, music, medicine, and architecture. The books were undoubtedly written for the secondary schools, which were at this time already clearly differentiated from the higher rhetorical schools. The practical secondary curriculum of the day was grammar in its narrow sense, and also literature, arithmetic, geometry, and music, a repetition of the Greek curriculum of the 3rd century before Christ. Seneca, BC 2 to AD 65, an authority for his age on matters pertaining to our subject, did not limit the number of secondary liberal studies to 7. In fact, his ideas as to what constituted the circle of the liberal studies seems to have been very indefinite. Now it is grammar, music, geometry, arithmetic, and astronomy. Now he speaks of medicine as a liberal art. Again, he plainly considers rhetoric and dialectic as higher studies, and hence a part of philosophy. Nor does Quintilian, AD 35 to 95, seem to have had any conception of 7 liberal arts. To be sure, he speaks of the preparatory training given by the Grammaticus as affording the Greek encyclia paideia. But the cycle of preparatory studies, which his model student of oratory was to master, consisted only of grammar, a little music, geometry, and astronomy. And even these, with the exception of grammar, were to be studied in a superficial manner. This was all the instruction given till the 16th year of the boy's age. So far, then, we are even further removed from the 7 liberal arts than we were at the end of our survey of the Greek period. Apparently, the influence of Varro had been of no avail to make permanent the curriculum which he had closely modeled after the Greeks. His failure to establish in Rome a modified Greek curriculum was due to the fact that soon after his time, rhetoric and dialectic came to be considered advanced studies. The Roman secondary course, as compared with the Greek, which the Romans were plainly attempting to follow, was thus much briefer. In the first place, the period of secondary education in Rome was shorter, lasting till the 16th year of a boy's age, not till the 21st as in Greece. Then again, the Romans' character made them reject from the curriculum anything not of a practical nature. Therefore, the study of mathematics, in which the contemplative Greek delighted, was reduced to a minimum in the Roman course of study. It is only as practical studies that Quintilian advised the study of geometry, arithmetic, and astronomy. The Roman schools, partially Hellenized, maintained their efficient and practical character for some generations after Quintilian, but a decline set in after the 3rd century. As the spirit of superficiality crept in, everything was sacrificed to the immediate practical needs of the time. Excepting in Gaul and Spain, where the racial characteristics of the Gallic mind encouraged the study of rhetoric and eloquence as the highest form of cultivation, the curriculum of the average Roman school contracted, and the Grammaticus encroached upon the work of the rhetor, a result which Quintilian had foreseen. In this way, while there was a decline in the field of higher education, the work in the secondary school was enriched by the addition of the elements of rhetoric and dialectics. The curriculum of the Roman school of this period consisted, then, of a superficial study of the elements of grammar, rhetoric, dialectic, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. This undoubtedly was the accepted standard in the pagan schools at the beginning of the 4th century. The evidence on this point becomes very convincing when we consider the latest researches as to the date of the work of Martianus Capella, De Nuptiis Philologiae et Mercurii. Capella, judging from the very little that is known of his life, could hardly have been a formulator of a curriculum. Hence his work, which describes the contents of the 7 liberal arts, grammar, dialectic, rhetoric, geometry, arithmetic, astronomy, and music, in the order given, would seem to have represented the accepted standards of his time. Wishing to write a poetic account of the liberal arts, he most naturally turned the work of Varro, the Disciplinarum Libri Novem, as a model. To a provincial of Africa like Capella, Varro, a vir Romanorum eruditissimus, was certainly a sufficient authority to follow in matters of both style and content. Again, the work of Capella, like that of Varro, is divided into 9 books, although since the first 2 books form the allegorical instruction, the subjects treated are only 7. The assumption that he followed Varro absolutely in treating the content is thus supported by the similarity in form of presentation. Indeed, according to his own statement, Capella omitted medicine and architecture, the 2 other subjects included in Varro's treatise, only in order to keep within the mythological setting of his allegorical framework. The 4th century, then, may be taken to represent the period when the curriculum of the pagan schools in the empire assumed the fixed character of a course in the 7 liberal arts. This century of social and political transformation marked the final stages in the evolution of a course of study which, through the medium of the public school, a characteristic institution of the later empire, proved perhaps the most effective means of preserving the classical culture of the ancient world. But during the 3 centuries in which this pagan curriculum was thus crystallizing, it was viewed with rooted suspicion by the Christian leaders. Throughout the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th centuries, men of the type of Origen, Tertullian, and Jerome felt that these very schools were the most formidable opponents of the new religion. And when one considers how much was at stake in the contest, the vehement denunciations of the pagan education by these men becomes intelligible enough. The close of the 4th century, however, saw a decisive change. The triumph of Christian ideals was complete, and the decadence of the old education in nearly every part of the empire was as marked as the decline of paganism. Now that these schools no longer menaced the supremacy of the rising church, the merits of the old curriculum could be considered dispassionately by Christian leaders. It did not require much discernment to see that, while the rhetorical pagan schools of Gaul as they existed in the 4th and 5th centuries in their decadent form were worse than useless from the Christian point of view, the subject matter of their instruction, literature, rhetoric, and dialectic, was of real value to the Christians as an aid to the study of theology. Even in the respective generations of Origen, Tertullian, and Jerome, the Christians had frequented these schools to a limited extent, and while a good Christian could not conscientiously become a teacher of rhetoric, it was not considered improper for him to study in the pagan institutions. It would seem reasonable, then, that, later in the 5th century, Christians would not offer objections to the introduction of the 7 liberal arts of Capella as a part of a curriculum which was to be a preparation for the study of theology. The tendency to use the elements of the pagan curriculum in Christian education was encouraged by Augustine himself, 354 to 430, who wrote treatises on grammar, rhetoric, dialectic, arithmetic, geometry, and music, 6 of the 7 subjects of the medieval curriculum. His influence was potent in committing the Church to a recognition of the arts as suitable subjects for Christian study. He sought to prove his contention by recalling the biblical sanctions which justified despoiling the Egyptians. Although not the originator of the curriculum of the 7 liberal arts, he, more than anyone else, made possible its general adoption by the Christian world of the West. With the support of such eminent authority, it was but natural that the position of the secular liberal arts as part of Christian education in the medieval curriculum should become secure. As far as is known, Cassiodorus, 480 to 575, was the first Christian to use the term 7 liberal arts in his De Artibus et Discipliniis Liberalium Literarum, a work designed to supplement his earlier work, De Institutis Literarum Sacrarum. He supports Augustine's contention as to the necessity of the study of the liberal arts as a preparation for sacred studies, and quotes biblical proof to show that the number of these studies must be 7. The text, "Wisdom built her house, she has hewn out her 7 pillars," Proverbs 9:1, gives him conclusive scriptural authority for his views. This quotation is of significance. It means that, at this time, Christian leaders admitted the necessity of incorporating secular studies into the Christian curriculum, and since these secular studies had been definitely 7 in number for over a century and a half, reasons were to be found from a Christian standpoint, explaining scripturally that their number 7 was divinely sanctioned. With Cassiodorus, the number and the subjects of the medieval curriculum become definitely fixed. His authority, together with that of Augustine before him, was all sufficient to give to it that rigid character which it maintained for some 900 years. Their work marks the final transition of the pagan curriculum into the medieval world of letters. From the time of Cassiodorus, the term 7 liberal arts is the regular expression for the round of preparatory secular studies. Isidore of Seville uses it as well as the terms trivium and quadrivium. So do Alcuin, Rabanus Maurus, and the scholastic writers. Later, so definite did this term become, the 7 liberal arts were not infrequently made the subjects of poems and paintings. Summing up the results of this inquiry, the following generalizations may be made. 1. In some 5 centuries of educational development, the Greeks evolved a curriculum of 7 liberal arts. The entire content of this curriculum was preserved for Rome in the Latin language by Varro. 2. This curriculum was adopted by Rome in part only during the period of the later Republic and the early Empire. 3. In the declining days of the Empire, a marked reversion to the entire Greek curriculum took place, and its form and content were definitely fixed about the close of the 3rd century of our era. 4. Christianity, triumphant, found it necessary to appropriate to its own use the content of this curriculum as a preparatory discipline for its higher study of theology. 5. Having settled upon the fundamental proposition of the value of secular studies, the Christian leaders followed the line of least resistance, and adopting in toto the pagan curriculum then in existence, hallowed their choice by scriptural sanctions. 6. The spirit of tradition, so characteristic of this period, was strong enough to maintain this curriculum in its rigidity throughout the Middle Ages. End of The 7 Liberal Arts, A Study in Medieval Culture, Chapter 1, The Development of the Curriculum of the 7 Liberal Arts, by Paul Abelson, 1906. Read by Dan Attrell. If you would like to support more work such as this, please visit patreon.com/themodernhermeticist. And above all, thank you for listening.